Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome what I would call an implementation guru from Singapore, Mr. Robin Speculand. Robin, welcome to the show.
Thank you for the invitation to join you. It's a real pleasure and honor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashutosh.
Thank you. Robin is a strategy and digital implementation specialist. He's the author of 5 books. His latest book is shown on the screen, which is The World's Best Bank, a strategic guide to digital transformation. And in addition to all the strategy that he implements, he's also a keen competitor in the Ironman. So, Robin, let's talk strategy and implementation. Most people focus on strategy. Why do you focus on strategy implementation?
There's a very short answer to that one, which I'll give you first, which is that's the part I enjoy the most because you see the impact. So to put it a little bit more succinctly, customers don't notice your strategy, they notice your implementation. You can have the greatest plan in the world, but customers aren't going to notice it unless you can drive it and impact them through the implementation. So for me, that's where I see the impact, the results, and that's what drives me. My passion is to help organizations and leaders make the impact for their own customers and business. So the strategy is the promise, but the implementation delivers.
Amazing. So, you remind me of that very old phrase, the devil is in the detail.
Yeah, it's absolutely true.
Isn't it? The implementation. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So tell me, what are some of the challenges in implementation once a strategy has been finalized?
Well, let me give it a little bit of positioning first, then I'll go into the challenges.
Yeah.
So, and it's a great question. The first part is, think of, there are many different definitions of strategy. The one I use that connects is strategy is about making the right choices.
Correct.
So you've chosen to start the podcast and help, the next generation of leaders. A company chooses which market, which product, which platform it will use. Therefore, what is implementation all about? Implementation is about taking the right actions. So then it's about, we're busy every day, but are you taking the right actions? Now, the challenge to answer your question is somewhere between that thought and action, there's a gap. And in that gap, leaders lose the motivation, the inspiration, the drive that they had in the strategy meeting. And one of the biggest challenges is not just to have that initial launch with a fanfare and the CEO on stage launching the new strategy. It's about then following through and driving it into the organization. So that's one of the big challenges. The other two I will mention is that leaders underestimate the implementation challenge. And I mean this with all respect. They craft the strategy, and then unbelievably, many of them go, okay, I've done the strategy. That's the hard bit.
Correct.
Implementation is easy. You go and do it. It's not. If it was easy, we wouldn't have such a high failure rate.
Correct.
And the third key thing, we've been researching strategy implementation under my company, one of my 3 companies, Bridges, for 21 years. Every research we do is poor communication. Even though leaders know they have to communicate, they get distracted by the day-to-day, the pandemic, other things happening around them, and they stop communicating about the implementation of the strategy. And when leaders stop talking and doing it, so do their team.
You're so right. When I used to lead large teams in my corporate career, the whole focus used to be the board would sit down and debate for 3 days, what will our strategy be for the next 3 years? Once the 3-year plan was ready, then it was someone else's job to go and make sure that it was met. And I think what you're saying is so critical. So tell me, once the strategy document has been prepared, what, in your opinion, is the way forward to implement in a clear and cogent way?
Great question again. So what does it take to then drive it through the organization?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we know it's the leader's responsibility to craft the strategy, but research, not by myself, but was published in Harvard a few years ago, showed us that only 8% of leaders have both the ability to craft and implement the strategy. So the gap that exists is we've been taught as leaders how to plan, but not how to implement.
Right.
And one of my other companies, one of the other 3 companies I run, is called the Strategy Implementation Institute. And in that, we offer to fill that gap by offering an online course. So the first challenge is leaders don't have the skill for which they need. The other challenge that we see so frequently with the leaders is that then in strategy, you Google strategy, there's hundreds of frameworks and templates and tools. Google strategy implementation, not quite so many.
Very true.
So they need the tools, the techniques, and the frameworks that are so often missing. And without them, they're left to wander on their own without any direction or help. So they're missing that structure, the frameworks, the templates, and the tools that they need to help them succeed, to set them up for success.
Very interesting. And from a board perspective, or from a leadership perspective that defines strategy, where does accountability come in when you look at implementation?
This is a debate that's gone on for quite a while, so it's a very relevant question. Who holds responsibility?
Correct.
It's being typically it's recognized the senior leadership, the C-suite, are responsible for crafting the strategy. And I was smiling earlier with one of your comments because in one of my books, Beyond Strategy, I actually started it. The opening line is, the board has signed off. So what's next? So the board give the direction, but just reflecting, and thank you for emphasizing my new book, The World's Best Bank. When DBS, a bank in Singapore that you'll be familiar with from your time here, it was the board in 2013, so 8 years ago, who realized they had to change or they were going to die. And they gave the leaders 200 million Singapore dollars, so about 137 million US dollars, and said, go and play with digital. It's not, you're not being held accountable. It's not on your scorecard, but see what you can do with digital. So this is an example of where the board came in, recognizing that they can support the leaders in helping craft the strategy. But at the end of the day, direct answer to your question is, it stops at the senior lead, at the C-suite. They're responsible for identifying. Let's face it, that's why they get the big bucks. Correct. What is our next strategy? How will we remain competitive? Which market should we be in? Which platform should we be on? That's what they have to keep looking at constantly. Fascinating.
And since you spoke about DBS Bank and 200 million Singapore dollars to be spent, sanctioned to be spent to create a digital strategy, talk to me a little bit about how important is digital in implementation and strategy.
It's obviously today, everyone is using some component of digital. Right. And I was doing a presentation last night for a client, and one of this, I do a quiz on myths and facts about digital, and the last question is always a fun one that says, who's responsible for driving digital? The CEO, myth or fact? And then I joke that it's a myth because it's COVID that has driven digital. So we all know what the impact's been of the pandemic. The critical question is, what component or which aspect of the emerging technologies and digital are you adopting? So every implementation today has some component of digital embedded in it. But I'll just add one very important warning is that it's not about having a digital strategy. Now, everyone talks about a digital strategy,
Correct.
but that's a red flag to me. As soon as I hear someone say that, why? Because it's about having a strategy in a digital world. Now, this is not just playing with words. The difference is that when you have a strategy in a digital world, you broaden your perspective. Whereas a digital strategy, you narrow, you're too myopic. So when you have a strategy in a digital world, you're much more aware of what's happening around you. And you're able to then track, keep the change, keep the pace. Because externally, the winds of change blow faster today than they do internally. What does that mean? It means companies are mostly playing catch up to what's happening around them.
Fascinating. And, your response gives me a segue into my next question, which is leaders and teams. Leaders formulate strategy. Leaders are accountable for strategy, but implementation has to be done by teams.
Yes.
So I'd love to get some examples or anecdotes without any names on where you think strategy implementation has worked and somewhere strategy implementation has not worked.
Absolutely. And I would just add in that the role of the leader is shifting and continues to. So for example, in the 20th century, leadership was very much command and control because most leaders came out of the Second World War in the army.
Correct.
And it was do as I say, do as you're told, clock in, clock out. Then in the 21st century, as creativity and innovation started to embed itself, leaders shifted from command and control to coaching and guiding.
Correct.
And that impacts their role. Now, today, it's changing again. And the term we use for that is it's shifting from vertical leadership, which is meaning you have to go up the line to get approval, budgets, permissions, signatures, to horizontal leadership.
Correct.
Where leaders are coaching and guiding their teams to then drive it. Now, one company that does this extremely well, which the world's best bank is all about, is DBS, where the CEO, a gentleman called Piyush Gupta,
he's a very good friend of mine.
There we go. It's a small world, and he's been there since 2009. And just a couple of weeks ago, he and I were presenting together for the Thinkers 50 conference in Europe, and he was saying while we were chatting, Robin, you can't take it on all yourself. You've got to then get others to do it.
Correct.
So, he used the term, 1,000 flowers bloom. So you've got to plant the seeds and get people and then guide them. So DBS, it's worked extremely well. And we tend to see, the usual suspects, it's where the leadership have recognized that they're changing. And if I can sum it up in just one example, leaders go from being the first to speak in a meeting to the last. What? Now, what do I mean? Typically, you start the meeting, everyone gathers, and the leader kicks off with the agenda. But for example, in digital transformation, it's a plethora of activity among the employees, such as design thinking, hackathons, customer journey mapping, data analytics. And we go to the meetings to find out what the employees are doing and how they're improving the customer experience. And you listen first, and then you coach and guide them. So, very big change in the way we're working today.
Very interesting. So my next question to you is about culture. I have worked across countries, worked with different companies, and culture determines a lot of how the company will proceed. I'd love to get your perspective on how does culture impact strategy and strategy implementation?
Absolutely. And it's one of the favorites whenever we do a post on this or a discussion. And I will give it a very succinct explanation. Two companies can have the same strategy, but how they implement is driven by the culture.
Correct.
So for example, let's take the airlines. You have Singapore Airlines and United Airlines.
Yeah.
Singapore Airlines is known for its efficiency, its standard of service. It's constantly ranked as one of the best airlines in the world.
Correct.
Now, United also flies similar paths to Singapore Airlines, also offer movies, meals. So what's the difference? It's in the culture of the airlines. And you might remember just a couple of years ago, there was a gentleman called Dr. Dow who was on a United flight. And this was, viral across the world, where United overbooked and they physically dragged the passenger because he'd already had a seat on the plane and was sitting there. And they asked him to get off the flight. And he said, no. And they physically dragged the customer out of the plane. I mean, unbelievably, and he had a bloody mouth and, bleeding from the mouth, Now, what kind of airline, that the culture dictated why they did it. Just two quick things to add on to that story. Interestingly, it was an algorithm inside United Airlines that told them this passenger was provide the least profit going forward.
Okay.
But he ended up suing the airline for $140 million US. So he had the last laugh.
Amazing.
But it's the culture drives the way you implement.
Fascinating. So my next question to you is on review. Strategy is reviewed maybe once in 6 months or in the annual planning cycle in most organizations.
Yeah.
How often should strategy implementation be reviewed?
Again, I'm smiling because your timings. I just finished work with a client Monday, Tuesday for their end of year leadership meeting, and this was the conversation. You're spot on.
My viewers may just think that you and I had a separate session in practicing this before.
And we did it.
Okay.
So, it's most organizations, they only pull the strategy out every 6 months, as you said. Now, it's crazy. This is the future of your organization.
Correct.
And you're only looking at it once or twice a year. So what's the implication? By the time you review it, small problems snowball into big problems. If you're going in the wrong direction, people have been working on it for half a year before you correct it. It's not enough. So we need to change what I call the review rhythm or the review cadence, which is the frequency of which you review. And that means the C-suite should be reviewing the strategy at least at a minimum every quarter, which goes with the rhythm of most organizations. In a department, they should be reviewing the implementation within their business unit, their vertical, every 2 weeks.
Wow. Okay.
And here's the crunch. As a leader, you should be asking your direct reports every week, not all of them, but across your team, randomly asking, how are you getting on? Now, I'll add one more quick thing. We're not talking about sitting down with your employee for 1 hour in a board, in a breakout meeting and discuss. It's a 10-minute check-in. So you go over, and it's also, you're looking forward, not backwards. So you're not reviewing their performance. You're saying, how are you getting on with the right actions to implement? Do you need support? Remember, you're coaching and guiding, not command and control. So check-ins, which come from Agile, and many companies are adopting Agile, is the methodology. So every week with your employees, every 2 weeks in your business vertical, quarterly across the C-suite.
Fantastic. So, Robin, I have time for 2, maybe 3 more questions.
My pleasure.
I'm going
it's been
to
a delight chatting.
But I'm going to come back to the pandemic. I'd like to understand from you, how has the pandemic impacted implementation of strategy? And then I have a follow-up question to that would be, how has the pandemic thrown up new opportunities in implementation.
Oh, okay. So let me take the first one.
Yeah.
Now, we all know that the pandemic accelerated digitalization. There's been enough written, spoken about that. But what about what else has happened around it? What's changing is that, the life cycle of strategy is dramatically shorter. Now, you and I are similar ages. In terms of, you and I can remember when you set a vision for maybe 10 or 15 years ahead, and your strategy was maybe 7 or 8 years, even 10 years. Today, the average strategy is only 3 years.
Okay.
And in some industries, they don't even have a strategy anymore. They continuously experiment, throw it at the wall, see what sticks. MVP, minimum viable products, get it out there. So the first thing is we have many more strategies. Now, what's the roll-on effect of that? If your strategy life cycle is every 3 years, it means, of course, you're implementing more frequently. And remember, earlier I said to you, leaders have been taught how to plan, but not how to implement.
Correct.
So as a result, there's that gap that even though we're still struggling, so that's been one of the biggest impacts. Implementation is more important than ever because the pandemic has shortened strategy life cycles. And your follow-up question was, just remind me, my apologies.
Given all the problems of the pandemic, what are the opportunities that have been thrown up for the digital implementation of strategy?
Yeah, so the opportunities are phenomenal. And I'll give it to you from a different perspective, which is very much, from myself. Digital reset the competitive start line.
Correct.
What do I mean by that? We always used to talk about Silicon Valley when we talked about innovation or creativity.
Yeah.
But from about 2016, 17, what started to happen globally was that it didn't matter whether you were sitting in New Delhi, Singapore, New York, or Silicon Valley. Everybody had an opportunity with the new emerging technologies to start. So what's shifted, one key chain difference is speed is more important today than size. So you may have read recently in the news, Johnson & Johnson have broken up.
Correct.
GE has broken up.
Yeah.
Why? Because small is more important. You look at companies like Haier out of China, who are in the appliance business. They run it with 4,000 micro enterprises so they can work faster. So the opportunity today, in a nutshell, is those who work fast and respond to the market and, more importantly, to their customer. And I'll give you one quick example. I love in Haier, and I'm a fan of their structure. They have an expression, I don't know if you've heard it, they say zero distance, which means there's zero distance between the feedback from the customer to the production line. It doesn't get lost in committees, bureaucracy. It's straight, the voice of the customer is straight to the production line to improve and it's working because they're now the most successful appliance. And just a couple of years ago, they bought GE appliances.
I know. Wow. Robin, on that note, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking to you.
That went so fast. That's all we have time for?
Yeah, we only have time for that. We've spoken for almost 24 minutes now.
Wow.
But thank you for talking to me at such length about strategy implementation, about the digital world.
Great question.
Thank you for talking to me about your book, The World's Best Bank. And thank you for giving me such amazing examples. Good luck.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for.
Thank you for listening to The Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for The Brand Called You.